She refused to give up her seat, but the world refused to look away. The subway car at DuPont Circle rumbled with the usual symphony of a Washington, D.C. morning. Newspapers rustling, phones chiming, and the occasional sigh of resignation from another tired commuter. But for 14-year-old Layla Chen, this ordinary Tuesday would become the day that changed everything. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Layla adjusted her worn backpack, her fingers absently tracing the Black Lives Matter pin her best friend Maya had given her last month. The morning crowd pressed against her like a living wall, each person lost in their own world of podcasts and preoccupations. She spotted an empty seat between a man absorbed in his Kindle and a middle-aged woman whose designer purse occupied the space like a territorial flag. "Excuse me," Layla said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard over the subway's drone. "May I sit there?" The woman, whose perfectly styled silver bob and crisp blazer screamed corporate success, barely glanced up. "It's taken," she snapped, pulling her purse closer, as if Layla's mere presence threatened its safety. The air in the car seemed to thicken. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between their phones and the unfolding scene. Layla felt her heart quicken, but her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Your dignity isn't negotiable, little warrior." "There's no one sitting here," Layla said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She gestured to the empty seat, acutely aware of how small she felt in her thrifted jeans and scuffed Converse. The woman's perfectly lined lips tightened. "I said, it's taken," she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "There's plenty of standing room. Go find another spot." Layla didn't move. She wasn't trying to start a fight. Her mother had taught her better than that. But something inside her, perhaps the same spark that had driven her to join the debate team despite her stutter, refused to back down. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. "Is there a problem here?" A deep voice cut through the tension. A young man in scrubs looked up from his phone, his dark eyes scanning the situation. He wasn't alone. Several other passengers had abandoned their morning stupor, drawn into the quiet confrontation. The woman, whose name badge read Cynthia Morrison, Senior Legal Secretary, turned her glare toward him. "This is ridiculous," she huffed. "I have the right to decide who sits next to me. This is my personal space." Those words hung in the air like smoke, their implications impossible to ignore. An older black woman in a teacher's lanyard shook her head slowly, her expression a mixture of weariness and recognition. A Hispanic businessman in an expensive suit straightened his tie, his jaw tightening. But it was the quiet click that changed everything. The sound of a phone camera activating, followed by another and another. The subway car had become a stage, and every passenger an unwitting participant in a drama that would soon explode beyond these metal walls. Layla stood perfectly still, her backpack heavy on her shoulder, her heart pounding against her ribs. She watched as Cynthia's face flushed, the woman's composure cracking under the weight of dozens of recording devices. The train lurched forward, but time seemed to stand still in that fluorescent-lit capsule of confrontation. "So you're just going to stand there?" Cynthia's voice had taken on a shrill edge. This generation, no respect, no understanding of boundaries, always looking to make everything about them. A young woman in a hijab and medical scrubs spoke up from her seat near the door. "The only one making this about anything is you, ma'am." Her voice was soft but carried an unsteel edge. "We all saw what happened." The subway car rocked gently as it sped through the tunnels, but the air inside felt electric. People who had initially avoided eye contact now turned their full attention to the scene. Layla's presence, calm yet unwavering, had become a silent challenge to something much bigger than a woman's purse on a seat. "Ah!" Cynthia's knuckles whitened around her purse strap. "I don't know why you're still standing there," she said, her voice dripping with barely contained fury. "There are plenty of other places to stand. This is harassment." The word harassment rippled through the car like a stone dropped in still water. More phones emerged, more cameras recorded. A tech worker with a Google lanyard narrated quietly into his phone. So this is happening right now on the red line. Lady refuses to move her purse for a kid. Claims harassment. Welcome to DC, folks. The tension built as the train approached the next station. Layla remained rooted to her spot, her silence more powerful than any argument she could have made. She thought about her mother, who worked double shifts at the hospital to afford their tiny apartment in a good school district. She thought about her grandmother, who had marched in Selma and told her stories of standing still when the world tried to push her aside. The doors opened at Farragut North, and a fresh wave of commuters poured in, immediately sensing the charged atmosphere. They absorbed the scene in fragments. The purse on the seat, the standing girl, the phone's recording, the palpable tension. As the doors closed, a woman in a crisp business suit stood up from her seat across the aisle. "Take my seat," she said to Layla, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "You shouldn't have to deal with this." Layla hesitated, then nodded her thanks, moving toward the offered seat. As she sat down, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. She looked exactly as she had when she'd boarded the train, and yet somehow entirely different. The rest of the ride passed in a blur of tense silence and darting glances, but as Layla later stepped onto the platform at Union Station, she had no way of knowing that her quiet stand was already spreading across social media like wildfire, igniting a conversation that would soon engulf the city and beyond. Her ordinary Tuesday was about to become anything but ordinary. By lunchtime, the #Subway standoff was trending. The first video, posted by the Google employee, had already garnered 50,000 views. 3 different angles of the confrontation followed, each capturing a different detail. The slight tremor in Layla's hands, the contempt in Cynthia's voice, the shifting expressions of the surrounding passengers as they realized what they were witnessing. The expressions of the surrounding passengers as they realized what they were witnessing. "Your daily reminder that this stuff happens every day," read one viral tweet, accompanied by a clip of Cynthia's "This Generation" comment. Only difference is someone caught it on camera this time. Subway standoff, DC Metro. Layla first realized something was wrong when her phone wouldn't stop buzzing during AP Biology. Maya, sitting next to her, nudged her arm and tilted her phone screen. Layla, you're kind of going viral." The video playing on Maya's phone showed Layla from behind, her galaxy print backpack stark against her dark hair as she stood her ground. The caption read, "Gen Z Queen shows exactly how to handle racism with grace. Watch until the end." Subway standoff. Stand with Layla. Layla's stomach dropped. She'd dealt with moments like this before. The subtle shifting away when she sat down at a coffee shop. The security guards who followed her through department stores. The fake smiles that never quite reached people's eyes. But those moments had been private, personal. This was different. By the time the final bell rang, Layla had missed 3 calls from her mother, and her Instagram followers had jumped from 200 to 500. Her latest post, a picture of her cat Mr. Whiskers wearing a bow tie, was flooded with comments. "You're my hero. This is what courage looks like. Someone get this girl a medal. Standing still when others want you to move, that's power." Meanwhile, across town in the gleaming offices of Caldwell & Ross law firm, Cynthia Morrison stared at her computer screen in horror. Her LinkedIn profile was being bombarded with messages. Someone had already created a Twitter account called DC Metro Karen using her profile picture. Worse, the managing partner had just sent an email requesting her immediate presence in his office. "The firm's reputation is everything, Cynthia," Marcus Caldwell said, his fingers steepled on his mahogany desk. "We're getting calls from clients, major clients. They're asking if the woman in the video represents our values." Cynthia's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. "It's being blown completely out of proportion," she protested. "I was protecting my personal space. Since when is that a crime?" Marcus's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were hard. "Take 2 weeks leave. Paid. Use the time to reflect." "And Cynthia?" "Stay off social media." But the internet wasn't done with Cynthia Morrison. By evening, amateur sleuths had unearthed her Facebook profile, complete with years of questionable comments on immigration posts and heated arguments about political correctness gone mad. Each digital breadcrumb was dissected, analyzed, and shared, feeding a hungry algorithm that thrived on outrage. At home, Layla sat cross-legged on her bed, trying to process the day's events. Her mother, still in her hospital scrubs from a 12-hour shift, sat beside her, scrolling through the endless comments and shares. "I'm proud of you," her mother said softly, squeezing Layla's hand. "But baby, are you ready for what comes next? These things, they don't just go away." His gaze filled the room. Layla stared at her reflection in the dark window, thinking about the morning's confrontation. "I didn't do anything special, Mom. I just stayed. Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do." Her mother's voice caught slightly. "Your grandmother would say the same thing." A notification popped up on Layla's phone. A request for an interview from the Washington Post. Then another from a local news station. A viral tweet comparing her to Rosa Parks made her particularly uncomfortable. She wasn't trying to be a symbol or start a movement. She just wanted to sit down. Across the city, in her elegant Georgetown townhouse, Cynthia poured herself a third glass of wine and scrolled through the wreckage of her online life. Her daughter at UCLA had already called, voice trembling with embarrassment. "Mom, my roommate saw the video. Everyone's talking about it. How could you?" The question echoed in Cynthia's head as she watched the footage again. The woman in the video, perfectly coiffed, coldly dismissive, felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. Was that really how she looked to others? How long had she been that person? A new hashtag was gaining traction. "Not in our city." Local organizations were sharing the video as an example of the everyday discrimination that often went unchallenged. Civil rights activists were praising Layla's composed resistance. Even the Metro Authority had issued a statement. "We are aware of this morning's incident and are committed to ensuring all passengers feel safe and respected on our trains." As night fell over D.C., both Layla and Cynthia lay awake in their beds, separated by miles of city streets and social divisions, both understanding that tomorrow would bring new challenges. The video had become more than a viral moment. It was becoming a movement, and neither of them could stop what was coming next. Neither woman slept much that night. Their phones continued to buzz with notifications, each ping a reminder that their private moment had become public property, fuel for a conversation that was rapidly spinning beyond their control. The next week unfolded like a fever dream. Layla's story became a Rorschach test for America's ongoing conversation about race, privilege, and accountability. Some saw a defiant teenager disrespecting her elders, others saw echoes of past civil rights moments. But most saw something more nuanced, a quiet confrontation that forced them to examine their own daily choices. Local organizations reached out to Layla, asking her to speak at events. News vans camped outside her school until the principal threatened legal action. Her Instagram followers topped 1,000,000, though she hadn't posted since that morning. The pressure to say something, to be something, felt overwhelming. "You don't owe them anything," Maya told her during lunch, as other students not so subtly took photos of their table. "But maybe you could use this. Make it mean something." That night, sitting at her small desk, Layla opened her journal, the one her grandmother had given her before she passed away last year. The pages were filled with stories, her grandmother's memories of the civil rights era, Layla's own experiences with subtle discrimination, poems about identity and belonging. She began to write. "I didn't move that morning because I couldn't. Not physically. There was nothing stopping me from finding another spot to stand. But something inside me had reached its limit." We talk about big moments of resistance, but sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest refusals. Sometimes standing still is the loudest thing you can do. She posted the words on Instagram at midnight. By morning, they'd been shared thousands of times. Something about their simplicity, their quiet truth, resonated with people in a way that the viral videos hadn't. Meanwhile, Cynthia's world had shrunk to the confines of her townhouse. She'd deleted her social media accounts after someone posted her address online. Her neighbor had stopped inviting her to book club. Even her regular barista at Starbucks gave her cold looks. The isolation forced her to sit with her thoughts, to really look at the person she'd become. She found herself thinking about her own daughter, now avoiding her calls, about her grandparents, who had arrived at Ellis Island with nothing but hope and determination. When had she become someone who would deny another person basic dignity? The question haunted her. One evening, as she sorted through old photos, she found a picture from her first day of law school. She was standing on the steps of the library, beaming with pride and possibility. That woman would have been ashamed of her actions on the subway. Something broke inside her. Cynthia reached out to her firm's diversity and inclusion coordinator, asking to be connected with community organizations focused on racial justice. The coordinator was skeptical, but provided some contacts. Cynthia spent hours drafting and redrafting emails, trying to find words that wouldn't sound like empty apologies or self-serving redemption. 3 weeks after the incident, Layla received an unexpected email through her school's administration office. Cynthia had written, not to apologize directly, but to ask if Layla would consider meeting with her as part of a community dialogue session at the local library. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Cynthia wrote. "I'm asking for a chance to learn, to understand, and to do better." Layla showed the email to her mother, who read it with careful consideration. "It's your choice, baby, but remember what Grandma always said. Change only happens when we're brave enough to face each other." The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning. The library's community room was neutral territory, with large windows overlooking a small garden. A professional mediator sat with them, but for the first 5 minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Layla broke the silence. "I write a lot," she said, pulling out her journal. "May I read you something?" He said, "I'm reading it." Cynthia nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Layla opened to a marked page. "When you told me to move, I saw every time someone had tried to make me smaller, less visible, less present. But I also saw everyone who taught me to stand tall. My mom working double shifts, my grandmother marching for her rights, my teachers believing in me. I stood still for them, too." Tears slid down Cynthia's cheeks, smearing her careful makeup. "I never thought..." she started, then stopped. "No, that's not true. I didn't want to think. It was easier not to." Their conversation lasted 2 hours. It wasn't easy. There were uncomfortable moments, defensive reactions, painful recognitions. But there was also listening, real listening, on both sides. That meeting became the first of many community dialogue sessions at the library. Cynthia, working with local organizations, helped establish a program for discussing everyday bias and discrimination. She wasn't looking for redemption anymore, just the chance to help others recognize what had taken her too long to see. She approached him with the card in her hand. Layla continued writing. Her Instagram became a platform for sharing stories. Not just her own, but those of other young people facing similar moments of quiet resistance. Her journal entries evolved into a blog, then a series of speaking engagements at schools across the city. 6 months after the subway incident, Layla and Cynthia shared a stage at a community forum. The audience included commuters who had witnessed their confrontation, students from local schools, and activists who had followed the story from the beginning. "Change doesn't always come with dramatic gestures," Layla told the crowd, her voice steady and sure. "Sometimes it comes in the moments when we refuse to move, when we stand still and force others to see us. But it also comes when those others choose to really look, to acknowledge their part in the pattern, and to do the hard work of changing." Cynthia spoke next, her silver hair now styled more simply, her designer clothes replaced by something more modest. "I thought I was protecting my space that morning," she said. "But I was really protecting my privilege, my assumptions, my right to remain comfortable while making others uncomfortable. Learning to see that, really see it, has been the most important journey of my life. The subway video still surfaces occasionally, reshared by new viewers discovering it for the first time. But now it's usually accompanied by links to Layla's blog, to the community dialogue program, to resources for understanding and addressing everyday bias. And sometimes on her morning commute, Layla catches glimpses of small changes. Passengers making space for each other, quiet acknowledgments, simple acts of courtesy that ripple through the car like light. She writes about these moments too, understanding that change happens both in dramatic stands and in daily choices. Her grandmother's journal sits on her desk, its pages now accompanied by Layla's own growing collection of stories. Inside the cover, she's written a new entry. Standing still isn't about not moving. It's about choosing your moment to plant your feet and say, "This is where things change." Sometimes that change is loud and viral. Sometimes it's as quiet as offering a seat to a stranger. But it always starts with a choice: to see, to stand, to change. The videos may fade from social media, but the conversations they sparked continue, flowing through the city like the metro lines themselves, connecting people in ways that transform both individuals and communities. And somewhere in DC, on any given morning, someone chooses to stand still, to speak up, to make space, proving that the smallest moments can create the largest changes.